Hello, my name is Martina Flor. I'm a lettering artist, author, and educator. Do you know what my most powerful tool to create my work is? Not my hands, not my brain, but my eyes. I've been training my observation skills since day one, and that had a major impact on my skills and success as a commercial lettering artist. Not only that, it has helped me find inspiration everywhere around me and staying away from endless scrolling down Google, Pinterest, and Instagram. Have you ever been in the situation of looking at your drawing, knowing that something is off or that it's not quite ready yet, but not knowing how to fix it? Fear not. This training called Letter Hunters will help you develop what I call your typographic eye by just using inspiration from your surroundings. If you want to improve your work, you need to start by sharpening your observation skills. Join me and become the best letter hunter in town. See you inside.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Open Studio. I'm your host, Martina Flor, and in this show I have honest conversations with artists, designers, and creatives to uncover their paths and discuss the specific tactics they use to overcome challenges and succeed on their own terms. Today I'll be having a conversation with Alex Trochut. Alex is an award-winning Spanish artist, graphic designer, illustrator, and typographer. Born in Barcelona and currently based in Brooklyn, New York. He's definitely a top artist and designer in the creative industries, mixing styles and genres and drawing equally from pop culture, street culture, fashion, and music. Alex has created design, illustration, and typography for a diverse range of clients like Nike, Adidas, the Rolling Stones, Cadbury, BBC, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and many others. Alex has been honored for his work in design and typography by industry pioneers like the Type Directors Club, Communication Arts and Graphics, including being named an Art Directors Club Young Gun, honoring designers under 30. The conversation with Alex was beautiful. He spoke about his family trauma with creativity as well as the steps he made to overcome it and build a successful career in design and illustration. Alex shared how he got his first assignments, became better at his craft, and built a business without having to take a role of a businessman. What stuck with me from this conversation with Alex is how changing different aspects of his environment, work, and even his creative tools created important shifts in his career and life. If you're planning to carry on changes yourself, this conversation with Alex will be eye-opening and inspiring. You can find him on Instagram at Trochut, that is Trochut, on Twitter at Alex Trochut, and online on alextrochut.com. Enjoy this show with Alex. Hello, Alex. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
Hello, Martina. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm so looking forward to talk to you, about your creative path and a little bit about your career and how you started with this. You might not know this, but the first time I saw you was during a lecture series in The Hague. I was studying type design there. I don't know if you remember that you made a lecture in The Hague. So I was studying type design there at that time, and there was this guy with a Spanish accent, like me, speaking about his work, but most specifically, you were speaking about one of the projects designed by Joan Trochut, your grandfather, which is a typeface called Superveloz. For those listening that have a love for typography like I do, I will add a link to this project on our show notes so that you can check it out. But in a nutshell, this Superveloz typeface is a modular typeface which allowed you as a designer to do a lot of illustrations and headlines, and it was like a display typeface. And it was at that time really innovative. And I found that project really fascinating at the time. So you stayed in my mind because of that project. But mostly I remember thinking like, hey, how amazing and how lucky this guy for growing up witnessing this. And because it doesn't happen often that a lettering artist or a designer has the chance to grow up in a family with a tradition in typography or a background in typography. So I want to start there.
Okay.
And I want to start there with you growing up, and I want to hear more about that and how it was for you growing up with the character of your grandfather, um, as part of your life, and how that played a role in your direction or the direction of your work.
hmm Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I never got to meet him. Everything that I got, I think it was coming from probably a genetic memory, and that somehow very strangely, I think like the epigenetics of something so specific as letters could travel from. It's not a physical trait. It's kind of like strangely enough, that same sort of like drive towards something so human made. It's not like, oh, my grandfather was a great runner, so I also have, that physique for that. So it is strange like that. But yeah, basically, my grandfather, he died just like 6 months before I was born. And he was pretty much very fed up for the um, graphic design at the time of his death, because he could not had worked as an artist or designer as he wanted. He basically was very successful at the beginning of his career, like when he was born in the 1920, and he died in the 1980. So yeah, basically he was the son of a printer man who's like my great grandfather, and he could see that he had like this talent for creativity. So he canalized his sort of skills towards creating typography. And when he was 20, only like 22, he already released Superveloz, which I think Superveloz in many ways, I think it's kind of like at the peak of what letterpress allowed to do. Like it's the most complex modular system that I think it's been created. No, and it was kind of like an intersection between many things that also was happening at the time between Bauhaus and Art Deco, but not in a reductionist basic way. It was way more expressive. So it was 250 pieces that were connected with each other and kind of like allow you to create all these incredible compositions. Funny enough, the Superveloz translates as super fast. But if you talk with a letterpress person, it will tell you it's the opposite. So
Yeah,
tedious.
just to give you
Yeah.
a little bit of context for those listening that are not type freaks or type aficionados, is the moment that this typeface was created, there was still this letterpress system being used to print stuff, which is this modular system where you had to put one letter, each letter was like a block, and you had to set them together to create a word. So you had to put one block next to the next one to create a word, right? So it was really complex in terms of, composing a design. You had to put together a lot of different blocks.
Mhm.
And this typeface had hundreds of blocks, which you can combine in hundreds of different ways. So I think that was the innovative part of it, that at that time you would use this system in a very conservative way. And this Superveloz typeface would allow you to, go beyond this very conservative way of setting up a typographic composition. You could create illustrations and headlines that were really expressive and is still within this very restrictive system, right?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. It was kind of like a Lego in a
Yeah.
certain way. It's all these like geometric shapes. So my grandfather was basically this very talented kid that was forced to first. I think he discovered design in a way that it was very vocational. Like I could, I think it's like I could never speak with him, and my father was doing something very different. I'll explain the whole thing because I feel like it's maybe since you asked, maybe we can like go through the whole thing. But
Yeah.
um, he at the beginning of his life, I think he was really channeling his passion.
Mm.
And when he was 22, he was doing this immense modular system. Did two more typographies. One was called Bisonte, and the other one Muriel or Juventud. And then from here, he had to take care of a business. It was a very big printer company that his father built. So back in the days, of course, when you needed a design, you didn't go to a designer, you went to the printer. So you had to do everything. So he was a man that had to take care of all the design aspects, which I think was his vocation and passion. But then he had to take care as a businessman of a company of 150 people.
Mm.
And so that I think pulled him a lot away from creativity
Mm.
because of that need. And then on top of that, there's all the other technical aspect of printing with letterpress, which is another set of technical challenges that I think he might have struggled a lot to be able to manage both things. Probably the technical side of printing and creativity would be kind of like still something he would like, but becoming a businessman was really what killed him literally.
Mm.
He was very stressed, and he at around 60s letterpress was starting to fade away because offset came in. So
Mm.
this technological change was really presenting a dilemma for him because it's
Mm.
either I start a new technology and investing in something I have no idea about, or, and this was his thinking, I'm going to stick to letterpress and I'm going to just have maybe a little niche, but the good printing standards that we have, they will not disappear.
Mm.
But yeah, he of course wasn't right in that approach, and then basically he was not a good businessman in that sense. He was more
Mm.
like an artist.
Mm.
And I can only empathize with his position, like how tough it must have been his last years because he was seeing how all that his father built was was kind of like going in the opposite direction that he hoped. And long story short, well, the company had to close, and he died when he was 60 from a cancer. So
Mm.
I think there's a lot of things that, for many reasons, my father, the idea of graphic design for him was something um, extremely stupid as a as a business career because he had the example of his father. And when I told him like I wanted to do graphic design, he was like, "You're nuts. I really don't want you to do this. Like you should not do that. Look at your grandfather. It was a fucking disaster, and I wish you better than that." But yeah, so it took me a little bit of time to convince my dad that that was actually what I really wanted to do. But yeah, I didn't know a lot about what my grandfather did in my house. It was known, of course, what he did as a professional, but mostly they describe him as a very quiet man. Like he liked to paint,
Mm.
and he liked to paint oiled impressionism, and mainly like the family is like oh, that he was a painter. Like he also had a printer shop, but like they didn't really put so much stress into the typographical achievements because he was so young at the time that he
Yeah.
accomplished them. That then by the time he was a father, that was already like 10 years ago. So by the time I go to school and I go to study graphic design, I'm starting to speak with teachers, and they like look at my surname and they are like, "But are you related to Jean Trochut?" And I said, "Yeah, you're my grandfather." And they were like, "Ooh, this is no pressure, kids, but yeah, you have a lot of background on your family." And then I learned more about his work, of course.
And I want to ask you because it sounds so such a heavy load in a way because you're telling this amazing story of this accomplished designer who was your grandfather, but at the same time, you are also telling a story of a creative who was forced into becoming a businessman and kind of missing that creative part of his work, and that becoming also like a little bit of a trauma for your father, who saw his own father go through that experience and telling you, hey, Alex, I don't want this life for you. And
Mm-hmm.
you, as a person who wanted to go down this path, how did you deal with that? How did you deal with first having that story or that
Mm-hmm.
trauma story, which is also beautiful? I mean, it's, you know, your grandfather is an accomplished designer, has made projects that really made a mark in Spanish graphic design. But how did you deal with that, which was a trauma for your father? And how did you push through it and became what you became right now, which is, you know, someone who works in typography and lives from it?
Right. Well, first of all, I think like I'm very grateful for my father because he did not what the father of my grandfather did, which is kind of like impose something to his
Mm,
son, right? Like, because he had to take care of that business, my grandfather. He had to, there was no other option, I guess, at that time, because there really was not also the career of graphic design per se. But maybe, you know, he will have been just be very happy doing just his creative job. And I believe like everybody is meant to kind of like follow their desires, and we don't
mm,
choose them, right? So my grandfather and my father, in this case, give me a chance. I had to really prove myself. I think that was good because I had to kind of like, this was just not like um, funny idea that I had one day, and then maybe I was a terrible student, by the way. Like my grandfather had like very little credit for me, and I was like, oh my god, where's this gonna go? And then he saw that I was really actually like for first time enjoying going to classes and kind of like yeah, like developing a talent that I had
mm.
there, and I couldn't really do it. So yeah, and in that sense, I'm very grateful because he once he saw it, he was very super supportive. So.
And I want to go back to something that you said about your grandfather, which is that, you know, he was not a businessman. He was pushed into the position of a businessman because he was running a company with 150 employees, and he was more of a creative soul, right? And I want to find out how do you relate to that in your you know, nowadays, right? You
Mhm.
are now working and running your own business as a graphic designer and artist, and you work for a lot of different clients, a lot of different projects, and that comes with the responsibility not only to create the art but also to run your business successfully, right? Even if
Mhm.
it's a solo business where it's just you just managing the whole thing. So how do you relate um, to that personality of like being a businessman and at the same time being the creative mind in your business?
Right. Well, I think in my case it's very easy because I don't have like you said, it's like a solo sort of like setup, and basically you collaborate with your clients, and I also work with either a producer, or if it's an agent, that they kind of like deal with all the admin work, like you know, negotiating maybe a fee, or sending invoices and doing all that stuff that I think I would not be great at, even just if it's some little stuff just for one person. So in that case, I think it's way easier. And then I think at some point, every freelance that starts to build up their own sort of like style gets into the idea of like the thought of like, should I build up a studio or a
Mm,
team? Um, that crossed my mind a few times, but I think honestly, I'm like so um, addicted to the process that I enjoy a lot being lost into the process of creating. And I think when you create a studio, you need to kind of like take the back seat a little bit and direct. And I just don't enjoy that because
mm,
I like the happy accidents of the process. I feel like a director needs to know where to go. and I enjoy getting lost all the time. Like I don't have a clear, I just figure things out as I work. So if I had to direct somebody, I think I'll be a terrible creative director or a very boring one, because I think once you have that idea, like how could you decide that that is what you're going to stick to when there's so many options that can happen during the way? It's like when you go traveling, right? It's like, okay, we're going to go here, here, here. But then, I don't know, something happened and you decide we're going to change plans. Better, right? So yeah, I cannot work with anybody under me.
Yeah, but it's interesting because in a way you have built a team where, you are independent from each other maybe, but you have someone taking care of the business part of the business, and
Mhm,
you are taking over like the creative position.
mhm,
They are not, your agent or your producer is not part of your company, but still it's also, I think it's in a way a modern or a contemporary way of creating a team.
mhm.
I always have the
Yeah.
feeling that we grew up with the traditional idea of a studio or like a design studio where there's a boss and there's the employees and they all sit in the same room. Uh,
Mhm,
but I think the way you're describing it, it seems that you have a little bit of a team, that you're not working alone on a daily basis, but you have managed to kind of delegate some of the things you will be doing as a business owner to other people that is not part of your company.
yeah, and I think it's yeah, I I think also it's the way to be free,
Mm,
and when you are like you can reduce the scale of things. I'm always very scared of like renouncing to certain liberties when you have
mm,
a big structure. But everybody, I think now, like maybe introducing a little bit the idea of like remote working.
mm,
It really is not necessary to have like a physical team under the same roof.
mm,
Like I talk with my producer, and she's in New York, and the client maybe it's in Spain or England or whatever, and then we can all function in that way. And I think makes things like way more fun if you're able to have that formula. For me, for example, I think what I sell is something very is like it's like it's a tailor shop.
mm.
It's everything needs to be adapted to one client, and it's not for a big production. I'm not gonna create like so many adaptations. I don't need like a huge team, and I prefer to work like this. I think it's a nicer product and more control over the final result.
So I want to go back to how did you started in design? So you mentioned before that you went to art school, that your teachers were saying like, "Hey, you're the grandson of Joan Trochut." And what came after that? So you went to art school. What were the steps after that that took you down this path of being an artist and working with typography?
Well, after finishing studies, I started to work as an intern for one studio in Barcelona called Turmix, and they are a branding studio, and their way of approaching projects is very rational. Like I remember every Monday we had a meeting and we discussed the project we had to go through the week. Yeah, I was working with Termix, and I remember the meetings were very fun because like we had to explain everything to each other, and it was not like, hey, can I draw a sketch or something and then I'll show you. No, no, you need to exactly explain what is it going to be, and so it really require like such conceptual flexing that I was like going nuts because it's not my thing. I'm like really bad about rationalizing just with ideas. I'm more like a crafter, not a thinker. And but it was very good for me because I spent 2 years kind of like working on that sort of like school of design. We could say maybe a bit more Swiss, like communication was really coming from the concept, and not so much seducing with the eye, right?
Mm,
So I did 2 years there, and then I went to Warszawa, where I spent another 2 years, and Basava was a completely different school of approach to the visual communication, which was way more expressive. And I had the best time in Basava. I had very good memories, and
In which
I
way
learned a
were
lot.
they? In which way were they different, or how did you feel they made a mark in your way of approaching design?
So I think they're a big studio, like, well, big in terms of like maybe number, I don't know these days, but when I was working there, it was maybe 15 people, and everybody was taking care of their own projects, and they were supervised by the creative director, of course, but yeah, everybody could like kind of like channel their own styles, and they were really welcoming everybody to bring their own ways into the
Mm.
table. So the styles of Basava are really kind of like a mashup of all the members at a time. So in that sense, I think like I gave voice um, to many people in order to how you could create something with your own visual language
Mm.
for their clients, right? So yeah, in that sense, I think it was like a very nice way to see how you could manage um, building your own content if you had the opportunity, right?
Mm.
So after that, I started to freelance after 2 years and building my own clientele. Internationally. I was
Mm.
doing my website in English, which at the time was like, whoa, you're making your website in English? It's so weird, right? Because like you're in Barcelona and nobody speaks English. But
Yeah.
yeah, it worked. And like you were getting projects from abroad and little by little, like working by email. I remember I didn't want to do meetings because I was so young and shy and scared. I was like, no, no, just everything by and but yeah, it was very fun. Like the first years were like super exciting because you're kind of like figuring it out your style, but you get to do, of course, like you get these opportunities, but you want to show in every project your best, right? And like
Mm.
you maybe make a lot of mistakes, but they're full of energy and like passion. Yeah,
I want to go deeper there. Like you were working for Vasava for how many years?
2 years.
2 years, okay. And you decided because this container or this design studio allowed you to kind of use or have your own input on the projects and kind of start exploring your own style, you decided to then later go freelance. I want to
Mhm.
ask you, like, why did you decided to go freelance? Because this seems like, you know, Vasava as a design studio, a workplace seems like a dream job. And I wonder what, you know, why would you want to go freelance at that time? And also,
Mhm.
like a follow-up question to that will be, how were your steps, or what are the things that you think made a difference in you getting clients internationally?
Okay. Yeah, well, the first question, I think it's at some point there's something always growing on you in terms of like what are your own dreams and your own sort of like ideas
Mm.
that at the beginning when you get to a job like there, it's true, it was like a dream job. But after 2 years, I think like you want to start making your own planning on where you want to put time. Because like,
Mm.
and maybe I was not quantifying so much. For me, it was like, it doesn't matter if I work on a project that is making a lot of money for the company or a project that is not making a lot of money for the company. I just want to do things that I enjoy. So
Mm.
because at the end of the day, for me, we're just getting a salary over there. And then, I really wanted to put more time into the things I was enjoying. And so I think that drives a lot my decision to decide to make my own and really put as much time as I wanted into the things that didn't make any sense.
And how were like the first months as a freelance? Like you just stopped working for that studio and you set up a desk at your place and you just started creating your
Yeah,
website. How were those first months, and how were the steps to get those first clients?
right. So yeah, I was At the time, I was living with Marta Cerdá. I think you interview her
Yes,
in the
yes.
podcast too, right? So yeah, we were living together, and I set up in our apartment, and yeah, for like 8 months, I was just working from there, and then yeah, basically, first step, building the website, and putting the work that I was able to do. Um, and then waiting. It takes a little bit of time. And the beginnings, I'm not going to say they're easy at all. Like they're always tough, but it's very important that I was able to show what I was capable of doing.
Mm.
And then after that happened, projects were coming in, and then you're able to yeah, kind of like after 1 year, like you feel like the wheel has turned like a whole sort of like cycle, and you are in a rhythm where like things are just starting to happen in a more regular basis.
Mm.
But yeah, the beginnings were kind of like any opportunity, like it doesn't matter. Like I was doing any job, trying to make it as exciting as I could, and like try to think about the portfolio as like this sort of like sacred gallery where like every work that you're doing needs to be a piece of a portfolio piece. No, you cannot. There was no room for just like whatever job. Like sometimes, now that you spend more times in the field, you don't put in the portfolio every job that you do. At least I
Mm.
don't. There's some
Mm.
people that can do that.
Mm.
I don't. I think like I kind of like separate a little bit the projects that I feel like, okay, this I will put it in the website because I think it shows something that others have not done. But there's some other jobs that are just like repeating a little bit what you already done. So there's not a
Mm.
lot of makes a lot of sense to put it back in the website, right? um so yeah, at the beginning I remember like every job that I was doing was like, oh, this is a new way of doing things, and like I was very excited about like experimenting and getting those opportunities. Yeah.
And I want to know a little bit about, you mentioned that you created a website which was speaking to your customers in the sense of like you were setting up the website in English so that you can get those international clients that you were looking for. You also showed work that you showed what you were capable of doing. And I wonder what are the things played a role in getting those first clients? Was that, you just put that website out there and you just waited? Or were there any other
Mhm.
things that you were doing, like speaking or connecting with people or doing like client acquisition or sending emails, or which kind of things? Because it sounds otherwise it sounds really like magical, like okay, you put a website out there. I bet that at that time it was different, like there were
Mhm.
not so many portfolios out there which showed this kind of artwork that you were doing at
Yeah.
that time. So today, just by putting your website out there, perhaps it's not enough, but I wonder
Yeah.
if there were any other things that you think played a role in your career taking off, or yeah, having those first projects coming in.
Yeah, I did a couple of trips to different cities. I
Mm.
went to London and I went to New York, and I showed my portfolio. And in both places, they were receptive. So that's something that I thought for me was very helpful
You,
to just
you
knock
were
the
having
doors.
meetings, sorry, you were having meetings with agencies or design studios. How was that?
Everything,
Mm.
just knocking like representation agencies, advertising agencies, studios. At that time, I was a big fan of non-format, and I went to London, and we got to collaborate. You too, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the studios from the early 2000s, where like we are like from that time. Yeah, Paris and non-format. Yeah, like kind of like they're the holy grail. So yeah, I really try to kind of like shoot for the stars,
Mm.
and of course, nothing really ends up happening as you plan. But it was kind of like this sort of like butterfly effect. That like, okay, it's not what I thought it was going to be. But then this other thing happened, and there was a lot of things appearing. It's true that back in the days, also like the internet sort of like scene for design was very centralized in like um, websites. There was like a few websites where there was the design news, and they were really kind of like, if you were featured over there, you really, there was a very loud sort of like voice. I guess similar to these days, maybe you get featured in Behance, but I'm not sure. There's so much more today, and there's so many channels. I think, yeah, it's important to make yourself present in platforms, but also physically in certain places. So if there's any young designers, I really encourage anybody to go to do like a business trip, you know, like take 1 week and plan your week into like, okay, I'm gonna go to this city, and I'm just going to try to arrange a meeting before going to show up in a place. But if they don't respond, maybe you could just drop a note, or you know, make yourself kind of use your own seductive skills. But like, yeah, there's a lot you could do if, yeah, if you do things in a certain way. Like, I feel like it's funny how you can get a job or not get a job, right? Like, it's like sometimes there's a difference in the way somebody has done something that got the attention of the person that lives
Yeah.
there, and you're like, okay, you know, like, yeah, I'm gonna greet you. Sometimes I get a call from, I remember, it's so funny, like it was like maybe a high school student that called me and so like, hi, I'm doing this work, and just, yeah, nobody does that. And it was so crazy that I was like, yeah, okay, like I want to help you now. But like, if that person had gone in another channel, it was so direct that it worked. So you never know, and sometimes it's the right time in the right place. So the more chances you play into that lottery, like to see if like you get to hit the jackpot and you're like the right place at the right time, just keep trying, right? Because like there's many things that can happen just by pure chance.
Yeah, I always say to, the people I work with or like students that I coach, like you have to try to keep yourself at the top of your client's mind. And, sometimes it's an email, and sometimes you will send a postcard, or you will send a note, or you will send them, or you will call them. But I think that, as you said, being there at the right time can be at different times in the next couple of years. So you need to try to keep on trying.
Mm-hmm.
And what worked for you, like to get those meetings? Because you were like, a designer or an illustrator, and you were approaching this big studio or star studios, design studios at that time. What worked for you to get those meetings and to get to show your work? Were you sending emails, or were you calling, or how was that?
It's portfolio. I think in that sense, you need to, I believe a lot that the talking needs to be done by your work. Like, but sometimes, you know, in order to get the work in the door, you need to do some talking. But I'm very bad at that, and I hope I got a little bit better with the years. But yeah, at the time, I really just left the work to speak by itself, and then let people see if they see an opportunity in hiring you. So yeah, I'm also not very good about the platforms. So like, it's also very important these days to be very active and like just show a lot, to stay present all the time. But yeah, back in the days, it was like, you know, you put one work in the website, or like once every, you know, once a month, and that was what was the kind of like window to the wall. And it was way more easy, because it's like, I don't need to put so much time thinking about, I need to make a post every 2 days in order
Yeah.
to just keep the buzz going. So it's a different game for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about what came after. So you were living in Barcelona for the beginning of your creative career, and then you decided to move to New York. I don't know if this was like really like a straight line, or you were going to other cities in between, but You're now living in
Mhm.
New York for how many years?
It's been it's been almost 10 years,
Yeah.
like 9 years. Like I got the visa in 2013,
Mm.
and yeah, now it's 2022, so it's nine. But I was like back and forth for 1 year before, so yeah, close to that time. And I was 30 at the time that I decided to do it,
Mm.
and it was kind of like a decision of if I don't do this now, I probably will regret it or
Mm.
like think about it all my life, like what if? Because I was very comfortable in Barcelona in that sense, and there was kind of like a life sort of like opportunity. My agents were telling me, "Come to New York, we'll give you work." And then I also met somebody, and yeah, it made sense at the time to try, and and yeah, I just decided to pack my bags and see how it felt, and yeah, and it still feels good, so I'm staying for
And
now.
how do you feel that that played a role in your success as a designer? Whatever you call
Mhm.
success, but
Yeah.
how do you think that really had an impact on that?
Look, I don't know in terms of like professionalism or like when you think about it's hard to say at this point because Barcelona, for example, has a great concentration of talent.
Mm.
And also there's a lot of like it's more based on experimentation almost because the market doesn't allow to absorb so all the talent. So there's a lot of people creating for the sake of creating, and in New York, it's kind of like a little bit the opposite. It's like there's a lot of it's big business, but you need to be effective all the time. You can,
Mm.
if you're not making money, you cannot stay in New York. So there's a little bit of, you lose a little bit that sort of like artistic approach to
Mm.
certain things. But at the same time, I got to kind of like learn a lot of things personally in the idea of just becoming an immigrant for these years, and I think it's been very it's been very formative in like I'm uh, a white man and I have all the heterosexual, so it's like all the privileges you could think of, but going through a process of like going through immigration in a new city and kind of like break your bubble of
Mm.
comfort. I think it was very good in a city like New York, where also it's like the most welcoming city for immigrants, right? So so in that sense, I feel like it's been like my school of life, New York.
Yeah, I mean, I also relocated cities and I live in Berlin now. And I feel that from an outsider point of view, oftentimes people think that if you relocate to a place like New York or Berlin, where there's a lot of opportunities or business in the broad sense, things will be easier. But there's this other whole side of things, which is being an immigrant in a new city with a new language,
Hmm.
where you have to find friends and figure out a lot of things that you had already figured out in your, back home, right? So there's a lot of, or a whole batch of stuff that you have to take care of, which you were not taking care of. On top of all those opportunities that this new city may open for you.
Hmm.
But of course, there's this other downside or this other side to stuff, which is like not everything is like all of the sudden a lot of opportunities coming your way, but also a lot of things that you have to go through and you have to pull through.
Hmm.
As you said,
Yeah, totally.
as an immigrant, right?
Exactly, and it's the little achievements like just to get certain things, and I can imagine also Berlin, for example. I lived there for 6 months in my life when I was
Ah,
doing my Erasmus, and I was lucky because it was summer, it was all nice. But Berlin is also it's a top city because I feel like it's it's not as welcoming as other cities. Like you
mm,
really need to adapt to a certain way of living. And in I don't know how it is for you, but like yeah, I guess like the language, for example, it's something that at this point you must have like a fantastic German, I assume, right?
of course.
Or yeah. And yeah, like the whole city has like a vibe that it's a tough personality. It's not the most lovey-dovey sort of city. It's kind of tough, especially in winter, no? Like when you see like the sun going down at 3:30 and certain things. Yeah, like my girlfriend was living in Berlin, and I spent some time over there. But yeah, it's it's a challenge, yeah, for sure. At
Mm,
least for me, I guess for you
yeah.
too, because you come from a very warm country in that sense, warm-hearted country.
Yeah, and I think like when I feel that when I look at New York, for instance, like I also feel that it's a very different way of, even in comparison with my life in Berlin. The places where you live in New York, you tend to live in smaller apartments because housing is so expensive, and the city is always up and running, and as you said, you have to be working all the time, or you have to work and produce because the city requires this, right? So there's definitely challenges to every city, and I feel that what you said before about that this in a way forms you when you sort of arrive to a place, and you have to find a new way of, or adapt to a new way of living in a lot of different senses: language, the amount of time you work, or how intense you work, the people, the housing. It definitely forms or changes things in you, or creates shifts in you. um, I want to move on to, you know, we were talking about your beginnings as a designer, how you had this background in your family of your grandfather being a designer. Then you decided to go down the path of design as well. You spoke about the beginnings of you employing yourself in different design studios and then going into freelancing. I want to talk a little bit more, not so much of the career side of things, but more on the skill side of things. And I want to ask
Hmm.
you, you are one of the um, most renowned um, typographers or artists out there, and you have
You think?
built. I think so,
I'm
definitely.
not sure.
And I think that for someone starting, they kind of look at
Yeah.
what you have built, and it's really amazing, not only in terms of like the projects that you have acquired, but also the skills that you have developed. And I want to ask you a little bit about that. How do you feel, or what do you think, if you could name two things,
Hmm.
what do you think are the two things that really made a difference in you becoming so good at what you do?
I think it's a matter of play. Like it needs to be something that it's almost not intentional. It's kind of like a um, drive to have fun with um, experimenting with, like in my case it's not ideas per se, it's sometimes it's styles. I
Mm,
think that's where the idea sometimes originates, and for me it's very important that there's a certain level of discovery in the process of how to translate things visually in a language that you haven't done before. So I enjoy that the most, like kind of like having a moment of um, surprise in the
mm,
process, and that it's more driven through the aspect of visual is so strong. And don't get me wrong, the idea needs to be there too,
mm,
but it almost, the idea kind of like shows up after you've been crafting,
mm,
and then kind of like shows like, okay, this for this sort of like um, language, this idea will fit, but it's almost like after the style. So yeah, and for me, like, and I don't consider myself very good about um, technical stuff when it comes to what the technology of today can really allow you to do. Like you see, if like there's any kind of like 3D artist in the as a listener, yeah, it's like what I work with, it's very basic compared of like what people are doing these days. um but it just kind of like I like to maybe use a simple thing and try to make it your own in the sense of like um the tool kind of like forces you to think in a certain way, and I enjoy when that happens, when like I learn what the tool, I could take the best out of each tool, right? So, and but if the tool is very complex, then I cannot go very deep. So I think that that's something that, for example, from 2003 when I started till 2015, I only worked with Vector and Photoshop, and I knew these tools, whereas I consider them simpler, but I could go as deep as anything. But these days, the tools are countless. Like there's so many tools, and at the same time, they're way more complex than Vector and Photoshop. And but that what happens with that is like you're kind of like skimming the surface of many things. So I guess like what I try to do is get lost in every project. Every project needs to have that sort of like moment of understanding what that style demanded to you for you to learn, and then you forget about it. And it's crazy that like my memory, I accepted that I will learn something and I will forget about it, and then in the next project I will have to maybe learn something new, and then I will forget what I learned, and I had to constantly kind of like navigate the library of content of tutorials and like learning new skills. And yeah, that's also part of like what I think is very exciting these days, that um, there's a it's a huge white canvas still for creativity, and there's a lot to just keep learning. And I really like the idea of like never not knowing very well what will happen in few years, like to have the idea of like, man, I don't know, maybe you start like playing with this and that, and you're gonna end up doing something that you had no idea that you will be doing. And I that excites me a lot, because the possibilities are really there. And yeah, once you're like, I think getting used to a certain level of like, when it comes to 3D especially, I think like once you kind of like spend a couple of years with that language, then you're kind of like in a sort of like headquarters of sorts, that you can branch out to so many other things. And it becomes very fun, because I think everybody kind of like creates their own path, and it's a very unique one. Where I feel in terms of technology and creativity, we're kind of like in a infancy, in a training stage. Everybody's still like learning, imitating others, and like everything like kind of like looks very similar, because these very complex tools we haven't um, absorbed personally enough. So there's, I think, in and you already see like there's some artists that like what you're doing is so layered, in terms of like you have combined so many skills into this process, that it's you have a very unique thing going on, as opposed to the maybe bigger part of the 3D community. I feel like it's still kind of like this learning process, and they haven't defined themselves yet. But the possibilities are really, really incredible. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in 5, 10 years and beyond, right? So who knows? But like I said, I think it's play. It's just having fun is the most important.
And I want to ask you to sort of wrap up the episode. I normally ask this to my guests, which is like, most of them are accomplished designers or creatives. And I want to like go beyond like that perfect image of the life of a designer, and kind of understand if there's any, in your story and in your path and your career as an artist, if there's any challenge that you remember that was, or any challenging moments that you had to go through, and what were the things that you do to overcome it? It could be any rough experience that you have had or any challenge that you have experienced throughout your career.
Right. Well, I think first of all, I think if um, if it's easy, it's boring. So that from start, and if you're not having fun, you're also not doing it right. So there is that sort of like thing that I think needs to happen. But I would say like every project presents itself with like good amounts of anxiety for me. Like they're um, figuring certain things out, and like it really occupies most of space in my brain, and I feel like sometimes it's kind of like a very monotone sort of like workaholic mind where like like there's no much room of other things when I'm into solving certain things. It's like takes a lot of my space, and I need time, and I get very stressed, and there's all these frustrations that are part of the process, and you need to learn to kind of like separate yourself, get some air, coming back, and protect your energy a little
Mm.
bit, because um, every day you accomplish something, either if it's a successful thing or not, but it put you closer to what is kind of like the conclusion that is going to come eventually, right? So
Mm.
either if it's a bad path, you might discover something out of that. But then that's kind of like on a daily basis. But
Mm.
then I also got to say that on 2015, this was kind of like the year that I felt like my portfolio was kind of like feeling a little bit um, flat in terms of the possibilities that I could see that you could do with our technology. And I dodged for so many years getting into 3D. And because I thought, like that's a little bit like my grandfather, like, okay, like I'm just going to do my thing and I will be able to do this for the rest of my life, because there's always going to be market for this one thing.
Mm.
And finally it was through my studio mate at the time, Freddy Arenas, that kind of like no, don't think about it, just like I'll help you out. Bless his heart, like the more you said that, he really helped me out for many years to learn 3D. And but it was kind of like an inflection point, because I was kind of like feeling a little bit unsatisfied, and everything that I did, I was not being very excited. So for me, it was a little bit of a big crisis in my career, that those years from 2015 till 2017. There was a lot of things that I had to relearn, and do some steps back. So yeah, I think, and this is not just once in a lifetime. I think it's gonna happen again, because technology is advancing so fast that every now and then somebody changed the rules completely,
Mm.
and you're gonna find yourself kind of like finding that you need to overcome the market demands or your own demands as a
Mm.
as a you know as a professional creative. And yeah, that's part of the game, kind of like the harder it is, the more sweet it tastes at the end. But yeah, it's very bitter sometimes. But yeah, I think everybody knows that. I'm not saying anything new, but sometimes it's good to remind it, because it does look in these chats that everything, oh yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of frustration that comes in the process, and yeah, it's part of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, it seems that by learning a new skill or by learning a new tool, even you sort of overcame that feeling of being stagnant at your work, right? So,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, I agree. That was for me a good key to get out of the room that I felt very trapped in. And
mm,
it's like, okay, just learn something new, and change the tool, change the game. I was really like that for me. So I think with creative block sometimes is, instead I was really focusing on concept and like trying to come up with new ideas, but at some point the mind is just very, I think it needs to be something a bit more practical and almost like physical, no? Change your brushes or change something, and then like new accidents will happen.
I love that. And I think that also relates a little bit to what we were discussing before, which is that, change your city and things will, you will create shifts in you that are not so obvious, but it would definitely have an impact on the way you approach your work. The same way you change the tool, that has an impact on the way, on the kind of work you produce. So I love that idea of like, change the tool or change the city or change something in your life, and that would change the game. So I'm keeping that idea with me after this conversation. Alex, where can people find you if they want to see your work or follow your creative process?
Well, I think Instagram would be maybe the best place. Also, I'm in Twitter. So in Instagram, it's at Trochut, and in Twitter is at Alex Trochut.
Amazing. So that is at Trochut, is Trochut. And I'm going to add this to our show notes so that people can find you. Thank you so much, Alex, for chatting with me today and for all the things that you share about your career and your story as a designer. It was great to catch up, and thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah, likewise. I think, thank you for inviting me, and I love the conversation we had. So
thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Alex, again for being on the podcast today. Bye-bye, and see you on the next episode of Open Studio.
Bye. Thank you, Martina. Bye.
So this is it. I hope you loved this episode. You can find me, the host of the show, on social networks at Martina Flor on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you have a question or comments, go to martinaflor.com/podcast, where you can see previous episodes, find show notes, and send voice memos with your comments and questions. You can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just go to martinaflor.com/YouTube to find them. You can, of course, listen to all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. If you loved this episode, subscribe to this podcast. And if you leave us a review, it will help others find us. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next episode of Martina Flor's Open Studio. Bye-bye.